Now you've got a remote so you can turn it
I'm
on.
just gonna do it manually. I'll get up and walk over there.
No.
Okay, so August 1st, 2004. My name is John Lyons. I live in San Francisco, California. I'm with my uncle Patrick Lyons from Yankton, South Dakota.
Right.
And today we are going to interview him and talk about the great times and life of Patrick Lyons. Looking forward to it.
Okay, fine.
All right, well, let's begin. Pat, why don't you just briefly give some general information, your full name, date of birth, where you are in the family, if Patrick has any family significance or whatever.
Okay, my name is Pat Lyons, and I was born November 8th, 1928. My mother said that I was born on the election year, and that she had gone and voted for Al Smith, and then she had me. Well, I looked at the calendar, and she's right, but there was, she voted on Tuesday, I was born on Thursday.
That's great.
And I was born at Wagner, South Dakota. That's where my father was raised. And after the folks were married, they moved to a rented farm at Wagner for 1 year.
Okay.
So that's where I started out, but of course I have no memory of that.
And were you born in a hospital, or were you born on the farm, or the in town, or whatever?
Well, I think I was probably born at home. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But that was, in those days, that was very common.
Yeah.
To have the doctor come, or midwives or whatever. But
And you're number one, is that right?
No,
You're the
yeah,
oldest.
yeah.
And how old were your mom and dad when you were born? Do you know?
well, it would be approximately 30.
30.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was born in 28, and my dad was born in 1899, and my mother in 1898. So yeah, about 30 years.
About 30 years.
30 years. Yeah.
And so you came to Yankton when you were about 1 year old to a rented farm here, is that right? But
Well, they moved to Utica, a town about 10 miles northwest of here, for 1 year, and then they purchased this farm, 120 acres, in 1929, right before the crash.
right. That's amazing. Was this your grandparents' farm?
No,
This was not their.
no, they bought it from the Schlafly family.
Okay.
Old man Schlafly had died, and his widow wanted to move to town, so they decided to sell the farm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, just some kind of like questions to keep it consistent with what the other boys are going to talk about. Do you remember what your first job on the farm was as a child? Did you have a chore that was your responsibility?
Oh, I don't know. I guess we all had. We knew that the cows had to be milked, and the eggs had to be gathered, and the chicken coop cleaned, and the wood chopped, and the cobs brought in for the old wood range, and so we had job security. We always had things to do, and there wasn't a question that they get done too, because that you're told to do it.
Right.
It had to get done, or else.
Or else. One of the things I asked is, do you remember a pet fondly when you were?
I didn't. I remember having a pet skunk one time. The girl that lived in town, it was deodorized.
Deodorized.
But she had to get rid of it. This was when I was in high school, and so I brought it out here, and it was a nice pet. But the dog didn't know that it was a pet, so one day the dog encountered the skunk, and it was all over with.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So the skunk lost?
The skunk lost, yeah.
Right.
But there was, of course, always the cats and the dogs, and Brother Frank, he liked pigeons.
Yeah.
He had quite a few pigeons, and I guess we probably had rabbits.
Yeah. What was your recollection of? I know that when you were young, you obviously had horses on the farm, and we kind of talked about a transition to the tractor or tractors. Talk about that maybe a little bit. What it was like to have the horses and the work.
Well, Dad was a horse lover, and he had 4 horses that he farmed with, and then he had old Waterloo boy, which he used to power the grinder to grind feed for the cattle and the hogs.
Mm-hmm.
I never was a horse lover, and I I couldn't wait for the time he would got the first tractor.
Right.
So I could hop on it, but that wasn't. My gosh, I guess I was probably almost high school age before he bought a tractor that he used in the field.
So, were there tractors on other farms in the area, or were you early in adopting tractors, or?
Well, some of the neighbors had tractors earlier, but I don't suppose there were many tractors for field work until at least the mid-30s,
So-
36, 37 in there.
So, what were, if they weren't used for field work, were they used around for power for grinding things, or drag?
Well, yes, and of course for the thrashing machine, they had the big tractor, either steam engine or a big gas tractor.
Yeah.
But there was only one of them in the neighborhood, and one person or maybe a couple people would own it, and then they would make the rounds in the summer to all the farms to thrash the grain.
Yeah.
We raised mostly oats.
And oats, and that was for feed for the livestock.
Well,
or?
oats was yes, horses.
For the
ate
horses,
oats
right.
and hogs, yeah.
Mhm.
And then of course you got the straw for the bedding for the animals, and
Mhm.
that was a big item.
So what was what was the farm producing that raised money? So a lot was used for providing for the horses to do other things. Was
Yeah.
it hogs that you took to market, or was it?
Well, the weekly cash flow was the eggs and the cream. We always
Mhm.
had milk cows and eggs, and so on Saturday they pack the eggs and the cream and take it to town, and that money was used then to buy the groceries.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad's Prince Albert tobacco,
Right.
if there was enough money left over,
Yeah.
he got his Prince Albert tobacco.
Yeah.
But those were hard times after the crash, and between the crash and the depression and the drought and the grasshoppers, and it
Well-
was really tough times
What were
financially.
What were some of the? Tell a little. Maybe make a little historical. Give some years to the dates. You were born in 1928, so
1928.
the Depression started officially in 1920, the end of 29.
Well, 29 was the stock market crash. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you were
Yeah.
very young still, but
Oh, yeah.
in the economy out here, it was a depression and a drought. What was the drought like? Do you remember much of that?
Well, I do remember some of it. I particularly remember the grasshoppers.
Do you? What was that like?
Yeah. Well, there were so many that, and what crops they did raise, the grasshoppers would move in and destroy it a lot of times, and they tried. They had grasshopper poison that they put. They used bran, and I'm not sure what the poison was, and banana oil for bait. They used to sprinkle it in the fence lines to kill the grasshoppers. And they killed a lot of them, but see, grasshoppers are migratory. They could fly in overnight, from other areas, and
Right.
so it was a big problem. Probably not as much here as it was further west, but.
Right. And the drought was bad here too, though, wasn't it? Or was that further
Oh yeah,
west?
it was bad. Yes. Oh yeah.
And so you had the double, triple
Yeah.
whammy.
Well, I remember Dad telling that, of course, the corn was picked by hand in those days, and he said he picked 40 acres of corn one afternoon. Well, the only place there's any corn was a low spot in the field.
Right. So it was pretty easy to pick 40
Yeah,
acres
yeah,
in
yeah.
one day.
Yeah.
The schoolhouse was just a couple hundred yards away. What was when you were able to go to school? Is that where you went first? Is that where you went to first grade or whatever?
That's why I went 8 grades over there.
Is that right? And so
Willowdale School.
and did the teacher lived with you? Is that right?
Well, when I started school, a teacher lived upstairs in the back room, and which was very common in those days
Yeah.
because a lot of the teachers didn't have any money or cars or any, and the pay was pretty minimal too. But
Right.
it just any dollars were so hard to come by. Just anything, any income.
Right.
Would buy quite a little stuff. But
So you kind of, to go back on the farm, you were able to produce a lot of food for yourself.
mm-hmm.
So it was more or less just that there was no cash, but you more often than not had enough to eat. Is that right?
I don't recall ever being hungry or that any of us were poor.
Yeah.
It was just like everybody else.
Right.
And we never thought anything about it.
How old?
Sometimes, in certain respects, I think maybe people were more contented in those days than they are now. They made their own fun.
Yeah.
They didn't have any money to be running off somewhere and things like that. They just they would have neighborhood parties, card parties, and picnics and things, ball games and things like that. Yeah.
What? How many of you? Were all the kids at school and at the farmhouse at the same time at one point? I mean,
I was out of high school. Let's see. I think 1946. I think I was probably out of high school before the youngest, Bob and Betty, were in school.
Okay.
And I went 8 grades over here, and Brother Frank did, and Gene, but...
Talk a little louder.
The three oldest graduated from Willowdale.
Okay. Now
the younger ones started over there, brothers and sister, and then they went to Sacred Heart School.
Okay. Okay. And the farm is about 4 miles from the city, is that right? Or from Yankton?
Right.
So, in today's terms, going 4 miles is nothing. But to go into town was a pretty big deal back when you were a child, is that right? Or was it not so much?
Well, there weren't any gravel roads. Gravel roads, just dirt roads, and of course when it got wet, it was just a quagmire. Sometimes you couldn't even get through them unless a team of horses was pulling the car.
Right.
And but he didn't. The car probably only went to town on weekends, Saturday to take the cream and eggs in and go to catechism, and then Sunday to go to church. That was about it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about the house rules, how your parents and you all acted, and obviously you all raised with good manners and good behavior most of the time. Was that your mom or your dad that you think was the influence, or was it kind of a team effort to kind of keep you guys in line?
Well, I'm sure it was a team effort, but as far as a mother had been a school teacher, so if we misspelled a word, we found out very quickly that we had misspelled it, and we spelled it correctly.
Right. Right. So, education was obviously very important then to the family.
Yes, it was.
And good. What about as you got a little older? Were there curfews that you had? Did you have, if you were driving into town for a weekend, did you have to be back at a certain time?
Oh yes, I'm sure. When it got to the stage where we had a car, there's curfews. Not that they were always abided by, but I tell you one thing. Whoever was out when we came in the next morning, Mother could tell you who came in. She could tell by the sound of the footsteps at what time.
Mm-hmm. And whose footsteps do you think were the loudest and the latest most often? Or was it a toss-up?
Well, I think we kind of took turns sometimes, I guess.
Yeah. You've touched on it a little bit about parties that you'd have and, gatherings that you had, but maybe you could talk a little bit about what holidays were with the family itself. At Christmas, was it the immediate family, or did you have cousins and aunts and uncles that would get together, or both? Or
we had the grandmas and grandpas. Well, of course, here, Mother's family lived here, and Dad's family, Dad and Mother lived in Wagner, so because of the distance, they didn't probably join us for holidays.
Mm-hmm.
But the uncles and the aunts and the cousins would get together for Christmas and Thanksgiving.
And it would be,
Yeah.
would it be centered around a big meal and?
Oh
kind of
yes, they'd
story
have turkey and all the trimmings on Christmas Eve. Why, we'd go to midnight mass and come home and have the oyster stew. That was the only time in the year that we ever
Yeah.
had that. So that was always a treat.
And you liked it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was special, and it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Where do you suppose the oysters? How they got the oysters here? Just.
In those days, well, I don't know. They certainly had to be refrigerated
Yeah.
to get here. I just don't know how they managed it then. I don't really know.
Yeah. You probably. You said you went to church every Sunday and catechism on Saturdays.
Mm-hmm.
Was religion a big part of your family? Do you
Oh,
think?
definitely. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
And it was.
Yeah, he abided by all the rules.
Yeah. Would you do things around the home? Like, would you ever do the rosary at home, or do?
During Lent, oh yes, the 6 weeks of Lent, they'd have to kneel down and say the rosary together.
Yeah. Do you think?
And always grace before meals.
And it sounds.
And you would never think of missing mass, or you'd have to be either awful sick or something awful bad
Yeah.
before you'd ever miss going to mass.
And when you went to town on Saturday and Sunday, you would go in the car. There was more often. Were horses ever used, or was it always a car?
Always a car.
Yeah.
One time, after World War II started, when gasoline was rationed, Dad picked up an old neighbor down the road, and he was going to show me what it was like in the old days. So we take the team and the wagon to town.
Mm-hmm.
It took all day to go to town and back. He only did that once.
Yeah.
But you know, I have a Model T today, and people say, "Gee, that car goes awful slow." I say, well, slow to what? Horse went 5 miles an hour. The car went 35, so it's pretty fast.
Pretty
Quite a
fast.
step up.
Right, relative to
Yeah.
the change in speed, it was much better. What do you remember? What it was like? If there were any injuries or sickness on the farm? What was it? Mostly self-help type stuff, or did you go to town a lot for your care?
Oh, of course, we went to Dr. Some, but there was a lot of home remedies for colds. You get the goose grease and whatever went you had. Why, you usually got the castor oil, orange juice treatment, you know, to get you cleaned out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I thought it was safe to drink orange juice till I was 25 years old, because I always figured there was castor oil in it.
That's great. We kind of skirted around it, but I wanted to go back and talk about some of the fun things that you all did when you were growing up. I know that you were probably involved in 4-H.
Yes, I was in 4-H some, although it was just starting about the time that I was getting, you know, beyond the age.
Right.
But all of the rest of the family very much involved in 4-H, and the folks were really interested in it.
Yeah.
And very active in it.
What about in town? I know that around town, the small towns around the farm, there were lots of county fairs, city town fairs, and stuff like that. Did you go to most of those, or did you try and get involved with them?
Oh, we of course went to some of the celebrations in town. I guess we as a family didn't go, like the South Dakota State Fair. The folks used to go to that with some of the neighbors, and they had gurneys here. Used to have pancake days or watermelon feeds. I wasn't very old, but I can remember some of that. In order to lure people in, they'd have free watermelon or pancakes.
Right. I'm going to do this with all the brothers, and you don't have any time to think about it. You have to answer, and you can only answer one person, and this is the rank of brothers, how we rank them. So, who do you think was the strongest brother?
Strongest.
And there can only be one.
You know, you're talking about physically?
Physically strongest.
Oh, gosh.
And you can say yourself, too, if you want to.
Yeah. Well, probably physically, Bob was the biggest
Okay.
stature, and um, I don't particularly remember him lifting weights or anything,
Yeah.
or tossing bales, but
Yeah.
but
Okay. So Bob. So who do you think was the smartest?
the smartest. Well, that's kind of putting me on the spot.
Well, that's the point of this.
The smartest. I don't know. I did not have a. I went to college, but I didn't complete it because I was in the reserve. Well, one of the reasons I was in the reserve when the Vietnam War started, and I got called up.
Mm-hmm.
I guess all of my other.
Was it the Vietnam War or was it the Korean War?
Korean War.
Korean War.
All of my other brothers went on and got their education and did very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all did.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Well.
But I don't know as the
All right.
smartest. I don't.
Okay. Who was the funniest then?
Oh well, that's only of course Bob would
Right.
be the answer there.
So who do you think was the mother's pet? Was there a mother's pet?
Well, I don't know as you call Bob mother's pet, but he had a way with her.
Uh-huh.
No matter what mischief he got into, he could get himself out of it because she might be mad at him at first, but before he got through, she would probably be laughing at him.
Yeah. How about a father's pet? Was there a favorite by your dad, do you think? Or
Oh, I think Tom.
Tom? Yeah.
I think Dad thought that Tom was going to be a farmer. Tom was small in stature when he was young, but he could learn by sitting clear forward in the tractor seat when he was just a few years old. He could run the tractor and the loader,
Mm-hmm.
and I think Dad thought he'd be a farmer. But he got out of high school, and about a month before school started in the fall, he announced that he'd like to go to the School of Mines.
Was that a surprise, you
That
think?
was a surprise, yeah.
And at that point, he had planned on staying on the farm and.
I think he had. Tom may have a few words, but I think he had
Yeah.
intended to stay out here. But he went to the School of Mines as well as Frank. So they both graduated from there and did very well in the
Yeah.
fields.
Do you think there was one of the brothers that was either the best or worst mechanic when it came to fixing equipment around the farm?
Oh, well, I always liked mechanical stuff. I didn't get into over engines or things like that, but for fixing things, I always liked to do that.
Yeah.
Could usually figure out a way to do it.
Yeah.
I'm sure your dad Frank would have, if he'd been on the farm, he would have done a lot of that too.
Right.
Definitely not Jack or Bob. That wasn't really their assets, the mechanical stuff.
Right.
But they had other things that made up for that.
Right. Do you think one of the boys then was better with animals than others? You know, in just how they handled them or the care of them?
Well, Tom, of course,
Same.
he was always out there with Dad from the time he was hardly doing a walk. And well, they all had their 4-H calves, all the younger ones, but Jack, he didn't spend a lot of time out there. His was more the flower gardens and cooking,
Mm-hmm.
and he tried to raise turkeys several times, and he did everything by the book, but I don't recall that he ever got a turkey on the table. Something always happened. It just didn't work out.
So was that a store-bought turkey for Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
So you went to high school in Yankton at the
Yes.
old high school.
Yes, right. We all went there.
All went there.
And that high school was built in 1916, and our mother graduated with a first class there.
Is that right?
In that building in 1916.
That's great. And so you spent 4 years there, and then when you graduated, you said you went to a couple years in college. Is that right?
I went to Korea.
To Korea right away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
They were still drafting.
They were.
And so as we thought the draft was ahead of us, so most of myself and most of my friends, we joined the service.
Right.
Where you could go 18 months, 2 years, or 3 years. I think I went 2 years.
Yeah. And what did you do? Tell me, where did you do boot camp? You were in the Army, is that right?
I was in the Army. I took my basic training in Fort Bragg, North Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and came home Thanksgiving of 1946, and then went to California and was shipped out to Korea.
And you were 18 years old, is that right?
No, I was 17.
17.
My birthday was in November, and I left for Korea. Well, when I left for Korea, I was 18, but when I joined, I was 17.
And that was
Yeah.
They allowed you to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I went in September, and my birthday was in November.
Mm-hmm.
That's when I was 18.
And so, what were you trained to do in Korea?
Well,
In the Army.
I was in the infantry, and I worked in a motor pool driving trucks some, but mostly in the shop, doing minor mechanical work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was fighting going on at that time? Is that right?
No, there wasn't. You see, this was 1946, and the war was over in 45, and then that's when the Japs were kicked out of Korea,
Mm-hmm.
and we occupied the country. The Koreans had been under Japanese domination from, I think, 1921, and they just destroyed the country. Anything of any value, they stripped it and took it out. There was an intense hate by the Koreans of the Japanese at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And we've occupied South Korea since that time, and today when I see students over there protesting, wanting our military out there, I wonder if they have not been taught any history of what we have done for those people.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
They probably have shorter memories when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So you spent 2 years. Were you always in? Did you spend 2 full years in Korea?
Well, I was over there over 18 months.
Yeah. And did you ever come home from there to visit?
No.
Stayed there the whole time.
No. Went over in the ship and came back in the ship. You didn't fly in those days.
Right. And both times in and out of San Francisco, is that right?
Right. It took a month to get over there.
And
We did stop en route in Hawaii and China, but it took over a month on that boat.
you were 30 days on that boat. What was that like, maybe? You could tell us a little about that.
Oh,
Bad.
well, you know, you get out there in a typhoon and people seasick and the food is terrible, and you know, if you'd get off, you would, but you don't do that.
You'd have a long
You're out
walk.
in the middle of the ocean.
You'd have
Yeah.
a long walk.
Yeah, but coming back, we came straight across in 2 weeks, and we were getting fresh food, which we didn't overseas.
Yeah.
Because of the problems of getting fresh food there. So
Right.
I actually put on a few pounds when we were coming back.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when you came back, what happened when you came back to the United States? Was your term of service over then, and you came back to South Dakota, or?
I came back here. I didn't have to, but I did join the reserves for, I'm not sure, whether it was 2 or 4 years. And I think we got a few dollars for doing it. It was negligible.
Right.
But I just forget how they talked us into joining the reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the Korean War started, I was called up again and took my physical to go back in again.
How old were you at that time then?
The Korean War, I suppose about 20. Let's see, the Korean War started in 1950, didn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, so when I got out, after having been in Korea, I was 19 years old.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and that was 1948. So, yeah, it must have been
20, 21.
Yeah, 20 or 21.
And what did you do between getting out of the Army and then maybe thinking about having called back up to go to Korea?
Well, I went to Yankton College for probably a year and a half,
Mm-hmm.
until I was called. Then I didn't go back to school, and so it was about that time that my dad kind of coaxed me into to start farming.
Mm-hmm.
Well, also there was some land available because my uncle Francis Donahoe had passed away, and his wife Ruth moved to town, and she was renting a farmhouse, so
Mm-hmm.
I rented, I guess, 160 acres from her
Mm-hmm.
to start with.
And that was the land on the north side of
Yeah, the
Yankton.
north side of Yankton, yeah.
And was that was your uncle's farm, you said, right?
Right.
And was that was 160 acres the whole farm, or was there more land around there that was farmed by other people?
No, they didn't own any. Well, they did own more land, but she sold off in '80 where the buildings were when
Right.
she moved to town. So I didn't have anything to do with that. But
Yeah.
I guess when Grandpa Donahoe came here, he probably bought a section of land, 640 acres. But through the years, the rest of it was sold off.
So how did you? So you were farming your own land. Were you helping your dad at the time too on this farm?
Yeah,
So you're
we
doing
farmed.
both.
We were farming together. I was still living at home at that time
Mm-hmm. And then,
until 1952.
and when did your dad leave the farm? When did your mom and dad move to the city?
They didn't. We leave the farm.
Okay.
He died. My dad died of cancer in 1960.
Right.
He was 61 years old.
And he was living on the farm
The folks were living on the farm.
here.
Yeah.
Okay. What was that like? Were you around much? Was it a long illness that he had, or was it?
Well, it went on for almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't know he had any ailments until he had a checkup and they found it in a large kidney
And what kind of cancer was it?
Kidney.
Kidney.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
and,
where.
So we had it operated on. It was cancerous, and so he took treatments for the cancer, but he never really recovered from the surgery. He just, from that point, he just went downhill.
Yeah.
He had the surgery like in February, and he died in October.
I see.
It seemed like after he had the surgery, the cancer just spread through his whole body.
Mm-hmm. And was he on the farm when he died?
Yes,
He died here at the farmhouse.
yes, he did.
And you're married, and you have a few kids and a few grandkids and a few other.
Married Pearl in 1952.
And how did you guys meet?
No, excuse me, 1953.
Right.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about how you met and how long you dated before you were
Well,
married.
Pearl she is from Clone.
And how far is that from here?
That's 140 miles west of here.
That's a pretty long way, isn't it?
Yeah. She came down here for nurses training, and so that's how I met her.
Yeah. Did you meet her through friends or?
Well, I guess so, but mother likes to take credit for the story that she was in having a gallbladder operation, and she liked this nurse that was taking care of her, and she thought I should meet her. Well, unknown to her, I was dating another gal who happened to be a twin, and there was she was going to Mount Marty, some school dance coming up, something, and the gal I had been dating, she wanted to go to the dance with somebody else, and so she was a friend of Pearl's, so this was a blind date situation, so that's how we met.
That's great.
Yeah. Now, I suppose she could have had her her sister dated me, maybe I wouldn't have known the difference, but I think I would. They were identical twins in looks.
That's great. So, so when you were married, did you live on the farm also, or did you live in?
We lived on the farm. We rented Ruth Donahoe's little house, and since we were farming the land, that's
Right.
where we started.
That's great. And then
And we lived there until that was from 1953 until 1960 when Dad passed away, and Mother tried to stay out here in the farm, but she just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And he died in October, so about Christmas time we moved down here, and then Mother moved in with Ann in the old Donahoe house in Yankton.
Had Ann been living in that house for a long time?
Yeah, she had. She lived there while the parents were living, and after they passed away, she got the house. She ran a business in Yankton.
And what was that?
A gift shop.
A gift shop.
Yeah.
So it was cards and little things.
Oh, cards and Fostoria glassware and dishes, things like that.
And what was the age difference between your mother and Ann?
About 10 years.
Ann was older.
Yeah. Ann never married.
Right. And they lived together how long then in town? They lived in two places together, or just one?
Well, yeah, they eventually they sold the big house, and largely responsible for Jack, because they didn't want to leave the old house, but it was just too much for him to take care of anymore, and so he found an apartment to which they rented, and they sold the house.
Yeah.
And they lived together. I don't know exactly how many years till Ann died.
Yeah.
I suppose
20.
it would be 10 years or so
Yeah.
that they lived in the apartment.
Right. And then they lived in the house about 10 years together also, or maybe longer than that, maybe.
Oh, maybe. I don't remember exactly. It might have been a little less than 10 years.
And so you had some children. Do you want to
Yeah,
just kind
we
of
did.
tell us a little bit about
okay.
that and a few of the
We were married
details?
in 1953. Susan was born in June of 1954. Linda was born in 1956, and Barb in 58. Kathy in 59. Mary in 1960, and Carol in 1963. So I do remember the years. Now I don't remember all the months and the days.
All the birth dates.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about maybe if you have some thoughts on farming. Changed obviously a lot from when you began to when you finished.
Well, it did, and it's changed a lot since I quit. Till now.
What were chemicals some of the big things? Medicines, or what was?
Oh well, of course there was chemicals used, and there was always something new to try out, there was medicines, but a lot of it was, when you first started using a product, was more or less experimental, because you didn't really know whether it would do what you wanted it to do or not. Some did, some didn't.
When you took over the farm, the livestock on the farm, it was chickens, and you still had some milk cows and some cattle and some hogs, I assume. And
when I started farming, we did have some milk cows. We had no chickens. I didn't want anything to do with chickens.
And why's that?
Well, because that was part of our job security as kids, every day to gather the eggs, and Saturday clean the chicken coop, and then go out in the fall of the year when the first storm was coming and catch those chickens out of the trees and put them inside. And, so that was not one of my favorite things. So we never had chickens. But when I started, we still had cows, and milked them and sold the cream.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time we moved down here, there wasn't any of that. We might have had one cow to milk for our own use, with all little girls for milk. Yeah.
Did you? How many acres were you farming when you took over the operation after your dad died? Were you still farming the Donahoe farm and the acreage down here?
Yeah.
And how big was that about?
Oh, when I started down here, I suppose probably 700 or 800 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we got up to 1,600, I suppose, by the time I quit, which was fairly substantial in those days. But now that's 5,000 acres or on up, and there's still some smaller farms, but that's the trend.
Yeah.
Yeah, these $250,000 tractors and combines, you can't justify it on 80 acres of land.
But relatively speaking, did you ever buy a new combine, or what was the price of a combine, let's say 20 or 30 years ago?
1946, I bought a combine with the heads for $46,000. Now that same combine with heads would be, I suppose, at least $300,000.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you obviously raised cattle and hogs, and you calved a lot. So you raised them from babies.
Well, we fed cattle, fattened them, and then later years we got into the cow-calf business, and we were in that for several years until the 80s came along, when interest rates got so terrible high, and it would cost 20% to borrow the money on a cow. There was $100 a year interest, and that didn't work. Absolutely didn't work. It couldn't work. It didn't last long, but it was great for the people that taking in the coupons, but it didn't. There isn't many things that you can pay that much interest for and make a profit.
No. So did you?
So that was a disaster, and so that changed the picture a lot. We got out of the cow business at that time, and then there were some tough years after that. The economy went bad. The land values dropped almost in half, and we had poor prices, and there was a lot of good operations that went under at that time. Some of them that shouldn't have gone under, but the banks got paranoid, and they kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater in some situations during those times.
Were there some neighbors that happened to, or was it further away?
Well, some people I know that happened to. I can't think of anybody in close proximity here that it happened, that they got sold out. But
so why do you think, what was different about you? Why were you a little more frugal about how much money you borrowed, or were you just a little closer to the vest, or?
Well, it was tough times for us. We were paying lots of interest, and it was costing $1,000 a day to keep this operation going, and in those times that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Keep everything going. So.
Well, and you raised a lot.
But we stuck it out, and of course we were buying land and making payments. We never missed a payment on the land, but dealing with the banks, when things started to go sour, why the bank examiners come in and they just destroyed so many good operations. The old bankers, if you had a tough year or something, they'd stay with you, and waiting for it to get better, and usually it did. But back in the 80s, it was some of these banks are just you can almost write history about some of these banks, or what things they did to the people.
Yeah. And were they local banks, or were they banks that you borrowed from in Omaha or Sioux City, or?
Well, they're local banks, but if you had a larger loan, usually they had outside money. They go to other banks to get the money.
Right.
Yeah, I think Norwest Bank was one of them that really was ruthless to farmers. And then, after this was all over with, then they come out, they're trying to lure customers back to them. Well, I always figured that you need the banker on the rainy day, not the day the sun was shining. That's when you find out if you got a good bank or not. But they'll stick with you when times are tough, not when. But the banks were responsible for a lot of this because we had such strong inflation, and even the Federal Land Bank, it encouraged people, buy that farm next door. And if you buy it this year, next year it's going to be worth so much more. Buy that combine, it's going to cost you more next year. Well, that came to a screaming halt when the interest rates went up.
Yeah.
And just turned around completely.
So how, through this period, you said you were buying some land periodically. Was it...
Yeah. We bought it on most of the land on a land contract.
Mm-hmm. And that tell us what that is.
Well, you make a down payment on a line with a pledge to pay it off, and payments of whatever. Some of them were 10 years, some 15 or 20 years. At a fixed interest rate. You made the payments every year until it's paid off, and then you got the title.
Right. And so through this time, things were getting a little bit better. So let's say the mid '80s, things. When was it the inflection?
Oh, it was getting into it was the very late '80s before it started to turn around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you came to a decision where you decided to sell some of your assets a few years ago.
Well, of course, when I quit farming, we sold off. We had an auction sale and sold about half the equipment off then, and I sold individual pieces off since then. And I still have some equipment.
Yeah. Do you still own some land then yourself?
Yeah, we still own. Yeah,
and
we still own about 300 acres. We sold off 220 acres.
Mm-hmm.
When since we were no longer farming and land prices started to go up, and the return on land isn't very good. Our taxes are high on it, and insurance. We have irrigation system that costs a lot every year, buildings, and so we thought that the land prices, at least to us, it looked inflated. So we took advantage of that and sold off some land. And now that was 2 years ago. Now land prices are still going up, but somewhere along the line, I think history will repeat itself.
Yeah. So what year did you actually retire? Would you say? When you
Well, I the last year I farmed was 1996, and this is 2004. I farmed for a couple of years after I went on Social Security, but when you go on Social Security, if you make so much earned income, then you got to start paying back to Uncle Sam. So we're giving back about a third of our Social Security to Uncle Sam because they're farming. So I finally decided that's enough of that.
So so you basically, when you were working full time, you'd go from sun up to sundown, and most of the time.
Yeah, that's true.
What was the transition like for you to be able to sit and have coffee until 8 o'clock in the morning, or how did you feel about that at first?
I didn't find it hard, really. I guess when you retire, you do the things you like to do, not necessarily what you have to do.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of those things that you like to do now that you're retired?
Well, I have an interest in antique automobiles, and we do some traveling, and we go down south in the winter time, and we like it down there. The best thing about there is about two things: the climate and the people.
Right.
Yeah.
And how long have you been going? And tell us, it's in Mission, Texas. Is that
Mission, Texas? Actually, we've been going down to Texas since about 1978.
Yeah.
But just for short visits. But until 2 years ago, when we bought, we didn't. Well, maybe we'd spend a couple of months down there, but now we spend more time down there. We go down in January and come back the first part of April.
Mm-hmm. And so you have one or two antique cars now, is that right?
Yeah, I got a couple antique cars and a couple more and a couple more.
What's maybe you could describe a couple of them to us?
Yeah, well, I when I was in high school, I had a Model T touring car in partnership with another kid. Well, when I went into service, I sold it to a drunk that staggered out of one of the local nightclubs for $100. And then, but I've always liked cars, but I never did anything as far as collecting until I retired because I didn't have time. So I searched around trying to find the Model T like the one I had in high school. I searched actually for a couple of years, but it was through Brother Frank and his friend Craig Beek is where I finally found and bought the car.
Mm-hmm.
Now Craig, I don't think he was really wanting to sell this car, but actually he and Frank went somewhere in Illinois and looked at a car that I saw advertised, and they advised me not to buy that one.
Mm-hmm.
And then Craig had a Model T Roadster that he would sell with a single seater, and I was thinking of buying that. But he also had this touring car, the 2-seater, and the Roadster with all little granddaughters I have. I decided for giving rides that Roadster single seater wasn't big enough, so Craig finally decided to sell me the touring car, and then that was the first car, and then I got the Model A with the rumble seat, and 2 Chevy Impalas, and I got the '78 Mercury, which we bought new, and in
So
1978, and I still have that. It's got 44,000 miles on it.
Well, I mean, the one other thing you have is you have a few antique tractors too. And maybe
Yeah,
were those actually on any of those that you used on the farm, or?
Oh yeah, sure, they were all used on the farm. Actually, the one tractor is a Farm All H that Dad bought new in 1942,
Mm-hmm.
and I restored it, and I have the cancel check that Mother wrote in August 1942 for that tractor.
Is that right? How many hours do you think is on that tractor?
Well, they didn't have a lot of them. They didn't have hour meters in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, since it's time to go to church, go to Mass, and keeping in the Lyons tradition, I want to thank you for sharing a little bit with us.
Well, I enjoyed visiting with John and telling a little bit about what I remember about the farm.
Excellent. All right, Pat. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
The Journey Home by Robert Lyons, written in June of 1997. From a pest house in New York City, my great-grandparents, Jeremiah and Ellen Lyons, had the first glimpse of their new home, America. Forced to flee famine and oppression, they left Dungarvan, County Waterford, Ireland in 1845. Filled with hope for a better life and $1,500 sewn in Jeremiah's underwear, they made the crossing. But when Jeremiah caught cholera on board ship, he was isolated from his wife and 2 young daughters, Bridget and Margaret. Upon arrival at the docks, unknown to Ellen, Jeremiah was placed in a pest house along the shoreline of New York City. There he was nursed by anonymous caretakers. For 3 months, Ellen searched every shanty and shack in New York City, telling the words of the story recited at every family reunion. Well, one day a man said, yes, but it just couldn't be him. He was so old and bearded and thin. If she wished, she may come in and look. There were no records on the book. He seemed to be traveling alone. His memory was gone, without name or home. Thus she found her Jerry lying on a bed of straw. His face was drawn in a look of awe. What had happened in the past, there was no telling. He raised his head and whispered, Ellen. The money had disappeared. After Ellen nursed her Jerry back to health, they joined with other recent arrivals to build the railroads from New York City to Chicago. And near that windy city with a growing family, including my grandfather Will, they became successful farmers and later moved farther west to Iowa, and finally to Dakota Territory, where they spent the autumn of their lives with their pioneer sons and daughters. Ellen and Jeremiah brought with them and passed along to their children and their children's children a passion for education and a strong commitment to exercise the civic virtues of their new country. They were the real radicals in American history. These people lived in their adopted land not as victims of the oppression they had fled, but as confident and contributing citizens who saw that their own fulfillment was in helping to build this country, its schools,